Your first film was Farmer Takes a Wife in 1935. Victor Fleming directed the film. Janet Gaynor starred in it. And this was after 13 weeks on Broadway with June Walker, correct?
I don't remember the weeks, but
Yeah.
I'm sure if you've done the research, it's 13.
What was your first reaction towards filmmaking when you got out there?
Well, it didn't start right away for one thing. I think I went out the end of February, and it was at least 3 weeks before the picture started. In the meantime, I had wardrobe fittings and that kind of thing, and eventually I was sent the script. And this is only a funny story. It wouldn't necessarily mean anything to you for your book, but having done the play, I'm familiar with the story, of course, and now I'm reading a script which is written for films, and I had never read a film script before. And in those days, at least, they were written in 2 columns on the page. The column closest to the binding was business, the camera movements or the movements of the actors, and the other column was the dialogue. Characters' names were always in capital letters, not only over here, but in the column where the business was, and also specific things. Camera movements were in capital letters. I'm saying that because I'm reading the script now, and let's say we get to a scene that my character's name was Dan, and Fortune Friendly was a character. Dan and Fortune have a dialogue scene in there in the lobby of the hotel. And then over on this column it says, Dan and Fortune crossed to dining room, Dolly with them. And Dolly was in capital letters. And then there's some dialogue in there, and I think we meet Molly in there, and we have some more time. And then Molly and Dan and Fortune cross back to lobby, Dolly with them. In other words, I kept reading about this, Dolly character that was always going along but never said anything, and I'm thinking, well, I've heard they change things when they make a movie, but I don't quite understand this character that's always there but never. That's how naive I was about motion pictures. I didn't know what Dolly was, and I told this story to Victor Fleming. I mean, I went into him and I said, "Who's this Dolly that's always going along and never says anything?" And he laughed. Well, then when we finally did start, and I don't remember which scene it was. Obviously, it's not the first scene in the script because that's not the way they make movies. But when we did start, we were doing a scene. I was doing a scene with June Walker playing Molly, and I was playing it the way I had been playing it for, as you say, 13 weeks in the theater. And Victor Fleming, and by this time I had become very friendly with Victor, just in going in and from the office, in and out of the office and so forth, and got to know him well, and I was crazy about him already before he even started to work. And he, after several rehearsals, sort of took me aside fatherly with his arm on my shoulder, a little bit around my shoulders, and said, you're mugging a little. Now that's a dirty word to me. And I had to stop and think, and this meant that, you don't play it the same as you do in the theater, where you project a little bit more for the balcony. And that was my first big lesson. And I just pulled it right back to complete naturalness, which is what I try to achieve in the stage, but you have to project that naturalness. So that was my first major lesson, and I just pulled it right back, being reminded that big lens right there was my audience, that I didn't have to go any further than that. In other words, to talk to somebody exactly as I'm talking to you. If I was talking to you and you were out there in the garden, I'd have to talk to you louder and so on. Well, it's...
So you managed to conquer the problem between stage and film pretty well in your first film.
To me, it was as simple as that, just to be reminded. I had to be reminded because I'd never had the experience before. And Victor Fleming did remind me, and I, in shock for a moment, realized, and I just, as I say, pulled it right back. And that's, other than the other long stories, and I don't think it's necessary to go into long stories, but because the whole medium is new to me, I wasn't aware, as I am today, of the unfortunate fact of films that you have to do it out of sequence, out of continuity, short takes, short scenes at a time, and without really a chance to rehearse as you do in the theater. That you're lucky to get any kind of sustained performance. In that picture, because I had had the experience of playing in the theater, I wasn't aware of out of continuity, particularly because I knew what it all meant. I had already put it together from beginning to end in the theater. So the things that I do remember are the sort of technical things about the medium that were so new to me. The whole bit of lighting and the gobos that they used to make a shadow come over here, and to have an exterior, be in an exterior scene when you're standing on the barge of in the canal, for instance, and you're looking up, and you're supposed to be looking up in the hill. Eventually there'll be another camera that takes a reverse someplace in Idaho, maybe, I don't know, that will show a covered wagon train going. But you're on the back lot of the sound stage, the studio. So what you're looking at is maybe a New York street or something, which is the other side of the canal, and a bank of lights. But you're given a chalk mark on a black gobo, and that is where you're to look for the the wagon train, you know. And you're looking at that chalk mark, and I'm thinking, like a kid, you really make believe here, don't you? But those are the things I remember, and the way they used bleached cornflakes, throwing them, sacks of them into a big wind machine to make snow and so on. I was fascinated by all the technical part of it.
Let's stop for a minute. Here's a list of lesser-known films. Now, if there's any merit to any of them or any bad memories connected with them, it's between 1935 and 1938. Way Down East, I Dream Too Much, Spendthrift, Slim, That Certain Woman, and I Met My Love Again. Are there any there that you feel are...
Oh, I can make comments short and long about all of them. You remind me as I go. The Way Down East was the first one, is that right? Well, that was my second picture, and because they were very excited about Farmer Takes a Wife, they, as typical in the industry, they want to repeat, do it all over again, and they try to find something that was similar in period and everything to Farmer Takes a Wife, and they came up with a remake of Way Down East to be with Janet Gaynor again, teaming us together. We started the picture, Henry King directing, and on location, Janet Gaynor fell from a little horse that she was riding in a pasture and had a slight concussion, but anyway, she had to withdraw from the picture. So, Rochelle Hudson replaced her, and it was not a very important picture, and it wasn't anything, there wasn't anything wrong with it, except that it was old hat, and there wasn't any real reason for having done it. What was the next one?
I Dream Too Much, or I Scream Too Much, as it was called.
I Dream Too Much was the third picture, and that was Lily Pons. I think she had made one before that. I don't know that that was her first picture. It might have been. John Cromwell directed. I don't remember anything particular about it. I don't know that I ever saw it.
Spendthrift.
Spendthrift was a quick, maybe it was a quickie. It was not a very important picture, made as one of the pictures that I owed Walter Wanger, and it was one that I objected to making, but I couldn't get out of it because I was under contract to him. Slim was one I liked. I got loaned out for that to Warner Brothers. Warner's didn't really know what they had, and it was not given to one of their top directors.
Ray Enright.
But he was a good director for the picture, and it was a good cast, and it is still called one of a good piece of Americana. I'm still meeting people who remember Slim. You know, they also remember Grapes of Wrath, but they like to talk about Slim because it's one that people didn't see or don't remember, because there was something very honest about it. I had read the book, and that's why I asked to do it when I heard they were going to do it. I had read the book by the nephew of William Worcester. Well, William Worcester Haynes was the man who wrote it, and he was a nephew of the man who wrote The Virginian, who was...
Owen Worcester.
Owen Worcester, that's right.
I read the outlines of that certain woman yesterday. It looks like the most implausible plot.
That was
Betty Davis.
the director,
Edmund Goulding.
Edmund Goulding. He came to me at a party one day. I remember that. It was a skating party, roller skating party, at a big roller skating rink. And said he had a picture that he was going to do with Betty Davis, and he'd seen something I'd done and wanted me to do this. And I was still under contract, as I think, to Wanger, and I was happy to get out of Spendthrift's type of picture, so I did it because it seemed to me Betty Davis would be an important picture. I'd done one, I think Jezebel I'd already done with her. Was Jezebel before that?
No.
This was before Jezebel.
I think so, yeah.
Anyway, I was an old friend of Betty Davis, as I'd known her before she even became an actress when she was 18 years old. So I think that may have been the reason I said, sure, I'll do it. And again, I didn't see the picture ever, and I don't remember very much about it. And I know it was not an important picture.
And I Met My Love Again.
That was one that Wanger did that was a little better than Spendthrift, and the reason I didn't quarrel about it at all is that my old friend Josh Logan was brought out to, he had been brought up by Wanger to work on Charles Boyer, Charles Boyer, Marlene Dietrich picture.
Garden of Allah?
Yeah, but it wasn't his, it wasn't Wanger. It was Selznick brought him out. But Charles Boyer was so crazy about Josh that when Boyer came back to Wanger for a picture, he talked Wanger into bringing Josh along. He was a dialogue director. And Wanger liked him on the picture that he helped Charles with, I think it was Midnight or something he did for Wanger. And as a result of that, he gave Josh and the other man who co-directed with him, whose name I don't remember,
Ripley.
Arthur Ripley, a story that he had bought from Saturday Evening Post. And they went out together, got together in a room someplace and talked it over and read it and decided they didn't like that, but they had an idea of what they could do with it. And they sold Wanger the idea. And I remember they went down to the desert someplace and wrote I Met My Love Again and came back. And I did that with Joan Bennett, who was married to Wanger and was under contract to him because Josh was my old buddy. And there wasn't anything really wrong with it. It just wasn't terribly good.
Now, this film is actually, I think, your fourth or fifth, but I think it was one that really made you. That's Trail of the Lonesome Pine. I think it made the greatest impression of audiences.
I guess it did. It was the first outdoor color picture. There had been Technicolor pictures before, one or two, but this was the first, and it was advertised to be the first outdoor color picture. And I remember Hathaway saying, I want this to be a color picture without color, because the previous color picture, and I hadn't seen it either, but was something that they had chosen for the color. It was a American Revolutionary story with the redcoats. Redcoats because it was color. So Hathaway said, this is a color picture, but we're going to take the color out. So that it was all, subdued colors, the colors of the earth and trees and our wardrobe, as they should have been, were in the subdued colors, the homespun kind of materials of the backwoods, Virginia backwoods.
Is it true about Al Cap?
I don't know. He says so. Johnny Springer has either talked to him or read that he said that, and I've heard it, that's all. I haven't ever talked to Al Cap himself. But it was an enjoyable picture to make. It was my first experience with Hathaway, and I am still one of his fans. I like his work. I like to work with him. I think he's got a way of working with actors. He's got some kind of, I don't know where it comes from because he's not from the theater or anything like that, but he does have a way of saying something to an actor that makes the actor say, oh, I know what you mean, watch.
Now, I've grouped two Hathaway pictures together. The other one's Spawn of the North.
I liked working with Sylvia, and Fred McMurray was one of his early movies too. And in other words, it was a good experience, and it was a successful picture. It was the box office picture of the year, I think.
What about Spawn of the North?
That was some years later.
2 years.
It seems a lot later than it really was in those days. 2 years to me seemed a long time. It was not the, hello, John. It was not Trail of the Lonesome Pine by any means, but it had a tremendous cast. And really the only thing I remember about it, the things that stand out in my mind were the camera. It wasn't process. I don't know what they call it. But they did camera work that made you absolutely believe that I was on a boat where an iceberg was falling right beside me. And they did it with double exposure kind of thing, because they had a camera crew, second unit, up around Alaska someplace on these boats, these fishing boats I guess they were that we were working, and icebergs around that would break off. But I wasn't there. But then on the street at Paramount, they would set up something with just black felt, I guess, that didn't reflect light or anything. And they put me on that and a camera down the street. And I remember it was a long thing like this, and I had to be against, they photographed me against black velour or something. And then in laboratory process somewhere or other that I've never understood, they duped me onto that boat so that you absolutely believed that I was standing on the side of that boat hollering to George Raft or somebody else. Those are things that I remember about that.
Was The Moon's Our Home the only film you made with Margaret Sullivan?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
What do you think of that film?
Well, it was one of the good ones. It was well received. I don't know whether it made money or not. I don't think it lost money. I think they were happy about it wasn't a big smash, but it did well, and critically it did well. And I saw it for the first time just several weeks ago when it was on television. And I told Johnny, as a matter of fact, because there were two of my movies that one night after the other that night. One was Male Animal, and one was Moon's Our Home. And I saw them both, and I thought Moon's Our Home stood up better than Male Animal.
Now we're coming around to your friend again, who we once discussed, the two films of Fritz Lang, You Only Live Once and Return to Frank James.
Well, You Only Live Once was the first one with Fritz Lang, and that was a Wanger picture, and it was a successful picture and was a good picture, but it was absolutely torture to make because Fritz Lang is and was a director who has absolutely no feeling for actors. He doesn't. He's not a masochist or a sadist. I mean, he doesn't try to treat actors badly. He just doesn't think of not treating actors as human beings. They are puppets to him. He's the master puppeteer and the artist, and he handles them like puppets, completely impersonally. And I don't think I stand alone as an actor who doesn't like to be handled that way. And I didn't get along with him, and he still is. He's got a lot to offer the industry, and he has. He's made some fine pictures, most of them in Europe, but a couple at least, because that was one, and I think Fury was one. Was there another one that?
Manhunt.
I don't know that one.
Manhunt and Hangmen Never Die. I think you consider those.
I don't remember them, so I wouldn't know. But he was a good director, but I didn't enjoy working with him.
His German background seems to conflict with the nature of Frank James. How did he...
Well, he never should have been chosen. I don't know whose crazy idea that was, but however many years later it was that after Jesse James was a big box office smash, and obviously the studio wants to duplicate that if they can, and so they do the Return of Frank James, which is sort of standard procedure for the industry. And he somehow was chosen to do it. He knew my attitude and feelings in regard for him, so he came to me and sort of tears in his eyes and said, I've learned my lesson kind of thing, and please give me another chance. Why, I should be asked to give him another chance. It wasn't up to me, but because I didn't have director approval. But he seemed to want to do it and wanted my best regards and good wishes for it, so I said okay, and he hadn't learned any lessons at all, and it was a terrible experience.
You went over to England to make Wings of Morning during the 36. How did you find British filmmaking in comparison to American?
Not really any different, and I can say that's holds true since, because I've made pictures abroad in many countries since. I don't think it makes any difference where you are. Technically, uh, the men, the workmen, are just as good. They may not always have the same technical facilities. They may have more primitive things to work with, but they get the effects just as well. I remember it was a Fugitive, as a matter of fact, in Mexico. One of their great cameramen, still one of their great cameramen, Gabby Figueroa. In a Hollywood studio, if a cameraman wanted in the fog effect, let's say, they send for the fog department, special effect department, and they got all sorts of things that blow this stuff out, and it's all done easily and beautifully. In Mexico, when he wanted a fog effect or smoke effect, they had cans. I remember they were about that round, and both ends were off, so there was just a cylinder. And they would put a little pile of Excelsior in there soaked with something and light it, and then blow it out, blow the flame out, so there was just smoking, and a man would blow through it with his own breath. And that's the way they were making it. Well, the effect was just the same. It didn't take any longer. It was more primitive, that's all. Wings of the Morning in London, it was the first color movie made in England, I guess abroad, as a matter of fact, because up to that time they'd only been made in Hollywood. The only thing I remember about it is that we didn't see color because there weren't any laboratories to process them. We saw the rushes, or at least the director saw the rushes. I didn't go to the rushes. Made from one of the negatives, which was blue, and I remember Hugh Schuster would say it looked like it was filmed through milk or something. So he didn't know really what he was getting until weeks later, months later almost, he was back in California, and it was put together from the laboratory there, and he saw a rough cut in color. But it was a happy experience. Other than that, Schuster was the film editor on my first two movies, Farmer Takes a Wife and Way Down East, at 20th Century. And a very nice man, a good man, one of their ace cutters, editors, had been for years promised a chance to direct, and they kept not coming up to their promise, and the management of Fox became 20th Century, and was it 20th Century by that time, Wings of the Morning, or was it still Fox? Still Fox. Anyway, he was sent over to be the editor of the picture, and something happened when they were shooting the prologue that I didn't appear in. To the director, I never did know the story, and the director was taken off the picture, and Schuster, by the time I arrived, Schuster had become the director, so that part was fun too. We lived together and shared a cottage near the studio, I remember, and a hired man that took care of us, and cooked and took care of our clothes. So it was a good experience. I think it was a good picture. It was well received. It used to play, I'm told that it played in France for years and years and years. It kept coming back. It kept coming back on 3rd Avenue art theaters for years too, sort of like Oxbow Incident did. I don't think it cost very much, so it was sort of like an art picture that was well received.
What about Jezebel?
Jezebel was William Wyler, and I'd met him only casually, never worked for him, but I'd heard horrendous stories about him. And I'm sure he would not say this wasn't so, that there were bad stories about him. Humphrey Bogart was the one that said, God, don't ever work with him. Well, there were similar stories about a lot of people. Also, this is very personal, whether it's right to be in this book or not, I'll leave it to you and Johnny. He had been married to Margaret Sullivan, who was my first wife. When we're going to do Jezebel, Margaret Sullivan is married to Leland Hayward, who was the agent of both Willie Wyler and me. This is just to make it all funny and personal. But I wasn't sure I wanted to work with Willie Wyler for a lot of reasons. Partly that I had heard he was a tough director, but mostly because my first child, who turned out to be Jane, was going to be born in New York City on the 21st of December, We knew the date because my wife had to have a cesarean. Her first child had been cesarean, so we knew the date. He wanted to do this picture beginning sometime in early November, it seems to me, and he had never yet made a picture under 16 weeks, so it didn't seem to me that I was going to be able to be, and I was damn well going to be at the present when my first child was born. So that was my main reason for not really wanting to do Jezebel. But he was so insistent and so anxious that he finally agreed in the contract that he would finish me by the 20th of December, which meant that he had to concentrate his shooting on my scenes, which was difficult for him and difficult for Betty Davis, because she would have to break off a sequence with my exit, let's say, and weeks later have to pick that up, which is not easy for an actor or actress, and I felt sorry for her, but that's the way it was. He did finish me on the minute, and I got back here just in time so that he fulfilled his obligation or contract, at least to me, and in the meantime was nothing but a complete sweetheart. And I am in love, and still am in love with William Wyler. He's a fine director, one of our very best. Some of the things that other actors had objected to about he will do it 70 times, one take 70 times, that may be so, but he wouldn't do one more take without a reason, which made me as an actor say, fine. He would do it, he wasn't satisfied, and would say, let's try it again, and this time, and there would be a subtle maybe only, but there would be something else that he would say, let's try it and you do it this way. And that's good enough for me. And, I mean, he's rehearsing with film, but that's fine, because that's the thing you don't get in films usually. You get the rehearsal in the theater. But if he wants to rehearse with film, that's all right, because it's one more opportunity to make it better. Anyway, I got along with him fine, and he made a good picture, and I was happy for the experience.
Now we come to the first of your controversial films, William Dieterle's Blockade. I'd like to know your reaction to the film during the shooting, upon its release, and the controversy.
Well, I didn't think of it as a controversial picture when we made it at all. It never occurred to me that it was controversial. There was nothing about it controversial. It was about the Spanish Civil War, but it didn't take sides. They were so innocuous in its whether it was one side, the loyalists, or it didn't say. And it was anti-war only, and it was only really anti-war in the last speech, which nobody could object to. It was my last speech, and I can't quote it, but it was against indiscriminate bombing of just people, civilians, in churches and schools. And who wrote it?
John Howard Lawson.
John Howard Lawson. I didn't know anything about John Howard Lawson, but he was later, I think, called one of the Unfriendly Ten and this sort of thing. This may or may not be so. I couldn't care less. But there was nothing of propaganda except anti-war in the picture, and that was kind of sort of at the end. It was to my, and I'm sure to Wanger's utter amazement, when it becomes controversial, and I think it became controversial because the Catholic Legion of Decency or something like that, and they probably because they figured it was took sides when it didn't. There wasn't any real reason. Actually, it was a silly thing to have taken exception to for the Legion of Decency or anybody else to. I don't know whether anybody else did, whether the American Legion or...
I think after the Legion of Decency got on it, a lot of other groups jumped on that bandwagon because they're all...
But it was a silly thing. I mean, no changes had to be made in the picture to appease anybody, and I don't know whether it did well, better, or worse because of the controversy, but it was not any great shakes as a picture, and nothing wrong with it. It just wasn't any big blockbuster. I think it might have been better if it had taken the gloves off a little bit better, more, but it was innocuous as far as I was concerned.